Hi, everyone. If somebody had told the rather wild 20-something-year-old me that I'd be standing up here talking to all of you about organic vegetable gardening, all I'd have wanted to know is what weed were they smoking from their garden? There's no ways I was going to become a gardener. I wanted adventure and excitement, and I wanted to travel the world. By the time I was 25, I'd gone down the Congo River on a barge. I'd come eyeball to eyeball with gorillas. And I touched the glaciers on the mountains of the moon. Me, a gardener? No ways. Yet today, I can't imagine my life without a garden. I started growing organic vegetables here in my Johannesburg garden about nearly 30 years ago now. And when I started, I had no idea that it was to become a really special relationship. It all started innocently enough. I had spent a year in North America traveling, and I'd fallen in love with the variety of chilies, the habaneros and jalapenos and serranos. And in South Africa at the time, all you could get were little hot red ones and little hot green ones. And I knew that if I wanted these in my kitchen at home, I was going to have to grow them. And I'd never grown anything. So, holding my very hopeful green thumbs, I dug up some lawn, threw in some compost, scattered the seeds, and that year I had about 20 different varieties of chilies growing. I suppose it's very fitting that my affair with my garden began with chilies. They're hot and spicy. They're gorgeous to look at, and like any good affair, they left me wanting more. So I dug up more lawn, and the chilies were joined by eggplants and lettuces and squash. And slowly but surely, my fling developed into a full-fledged relationship. And as with any relationship, it required all those familiar ingredients: trust, love, commitment, sense of humor, and let's not forget compromise. Before I knew it, those Saturday afternoons where I'd normally hang in a hammock lazily reading a novel were being spent sweatily and joyfully in my vegetable patch. Every year, my garden expanded, and as it expanded, so my knowledge grew. There was no Google back then, and the only books I could find were American or British, and they had very limited relevance. So I learned from my garden. I learned by observing, I learned by experimenting, and I learned from my mistakes and my successes. And as my relationship with my garden grew, so I started becoming aware of all of these other relationships that were going on in my garden, between the insects and the plants and the soil and the soil and the insects. And the more I began nurturing these, becoming aware of them, the more I became a part of my garden instead of a part from it. An apple a day keeps the doctor away, right? We all know that. Well, that phrase was coined in 1914. Today, we would have to eat 26 apples to get the same amount of nutrients that a 1914 apple gave us. This is what we have done to our soil in just over 100 years. Our fertile soil is precious, and it's also a limited resource. In the last 4 decades alone, we have lost or degraded a third of our arable land. Most of this is due to use of toxic pesticides, chemical fertilizers, and unsustainable agricultural practices that are very destructive to our arable soil. Organic gardening, on the other hand, is all about working in harmony with nature. Organic has become one of those words. The marketers, they love it. Everything is now organic or green. They just jump on a bandwagon. It's like extra virgin olive oil. I saw a blanket that had a label, and it said 100% virgin acrylic. The same things happened with organics. So, what does organic mean for us when it comes to gardening and farming? Well, organic gardening all starts with building healthy soil, just the same way a good relationship has a solid foundation. Healthy soil equals healthy plants equals healthy humans. So, then what is healthy soil? Healthy soil is a soil that is full of humus. Now, this is the broken down organic matter that is the life force of soil. It's full of billions of beneficial organisms like algae, insects, worms, bacteria. In 1 tablespoon of healthy humus rich soil, there are more beneficial microorganisms than there are people on this planet in 1 tablespoon. And we want these in our soil for many reasons. Earthworms, for example, they leave the soil 8 times richer after they have ingested it. We think we invented the World Wide Web, right? Wrong. Nature got there ahead of us. In undisturbed soil, there exist vast underground networks that form symbiotic relationships with our plants. Our vegetable roots can only reach a certain limited area of the soil. However, when they sink their roots into this network, they increase their access to water and nutrients up to 700 times. Now, to build and maintain these relationships, we have to stop digging. Digging is not only a pain in the back, it is also incredibly destructive to all of those beneficial relationships. Every time we dig, we are destroying beneficial organisms and their homes. Every time we dig, we are drying out the soil. There's water that is lost. And what's in that water is nutrients, dissolved nutrients that are also now gone. And as anybody who's ever dug the soil up will know, the minute you dig, you're going to expose weeds, seeds, and you're going to have a weed problem. So stop digging. Instead, to maintain high levels of fertility and humus in the soil, we regularly add organic matter to the surface of the soil: mulch, manure, compost. Nature is designed so that whatever is lying on the surface of the soil is naturally incorporated into the bottom layers. She doesn't come up with elves at night and dig it up when you aren't looking. But earthworms do. They will come at midnight, and in no time at all, these leaves will be pulled down into the soil and they will have been turned into fertile humus for our plants. A healthy relationship has a good balance. I remember when I was walking in what we're aiming for in an edible garden is we are aiming for a food chain with us at the top busy eating. So there has to be something at the bottom busy being eaten. And I was walking in my veggie garden and I saw this cluster of aphids on my honeysuckle. And normally I'd have left them because I can just blast them off with water, with some water, and it's easy to get rid of. It's the easiest way to get rid of the blighters. But I was writing a book and I needed photographs of the bad guys. So I left them, and within a few days there were ladybirds right next to the aphids. And not just ladybirds. These ladybirds were laying eggs, these little yellow symmetrical eggs right next to the aphids. I felt like David Attenborough. Today, in my garden. It was this wildlife viewing in miniature. It was amazing because the next thing that happened were these little creatures. These are ladybird larvae. They hatch out and they are aphid-eating machines. In a few weeks, I had no aphids left, and I had a very healthy, thriving ladybird population. Plus, I had learned a really valuable lesson about creating this balanced ecosystem where there's never enough of one pest or a number of pests to cause a problem because there are enough beneficial insects to keep them in check. Had I taken a toxic pesticide and sprayed these aphids, I would have killed the aphids, but I would have also killed all the ladybirds. And the sad truth, unfortunately, about the good guys and the bad guys is that the bad guys tend to breed a hell of a lot faster than the good guys. So a couple of aphids would have survived and they would have started breeding. In a few weeks, I would have had a much bigger aphid infestation and I wouldn't have had any ladybirds to eat them. Within a balanced organic garden, there are many, many other relationships. Plants, for example, produce flowers, colorful flowers to attract the pollinators. They actually have patterns on their petals to form a runway that actually guide the insects in. We can't see them. We can only see them underneath an infrared light. But the insects see them and they literally make a beeline for them. The plants benefit because their pollen is far more widely dispersed. And the insects, they're rewarded with both pollen and nectar. Other beneficial insects, oopsie, I'm falling off my platform now. Other beneficial insects include spiders, this gorgeous crab spider, praying mantises, dragonflies, and lacewings. And then you get parasitic wasps, this tiny little insect. What it does is it lays its eggs on the back of plant-eating caterpillars. These larvae, when they hatch out, they eat the caterpillar. It's a bit like the invasion of the body snatchers, but this is the kind of pest control we want, rather than using toxic pesticides. Now, to encourage all these insects to come into our gardens, we need to plant as much variety as possible. My garden is like a jungle. It's a patchwork jungle. It's full of edible flowers, full of herbs. I leave vegetables to flower because those also attract beneficial insect. You have to start thinking like an insect. A healthy relationship requires us to be observant and aware of our partners. So often people say to me, "Oh, you're so lucky you've got green fingers. I can't get anything to grow. I kill everything." Well, I didn't grow these I wasn't born with these green fingers. I grew these green fingers through learning from my garden, through observing and watching what was happening in my garden. And so quickly, if we go into a nursery and we look at all those tools sitting on the shelves, we can buy all these gadgets and they will help us garden better. But the best tool that you can have is knowledge. We are so quick to turn to an expert the minute we have a problem, whether it's with our bodies, our computers, or our gardens. And part of becoming a green-fingered, productive organic gardener is gaining as much knowledge about our garden as possible, about knowledge of plants, insects, soil, and cycles. I've traveled to many places in the world, but one of my favorite journeys is still the one that I do most often, is from my kitchen to my vegetable garden with a colander to pick vegetables that are in season, healthy and fresh, and bring them back into my kitchen to be inspired by those ingredients to make a meal for the people I love. In our 21st century of absolute convenience and consumerism, we have become disconnected from nature. And we somehow believe that we can not only live separately from nature, but that we can continue to take and take and take without giving anything back. And that is not how a successful relationship works. We are a part of nature. And if we continue to live as if we are a separate, privileged species, we risk losing everything. When we look at the multitude of problems facing us as human beings on the planet, because the planet will be here, we'll just be gone, it can be very daunting and overwhelming. And it can be really easy to say, what difference can I really make? What difference does it make if I take my recycling out this week or not, And it can be really overwhelming, especially if we watch too much news. And I'm standing here as an example of how one small step can make a huge difference. In 2008, I wrote my first book, and I wrote it, Jane's Delicious Garden, simply to share the information that I had learned while growing vegetables in my garden. That book has sold over 30,000 copies now. It has led to 5 more best-selling books, and it has contributed to this growing green revolution in South Africa with tens of thousands of people now growing their own organic food. And it all started with just a little handful of chili seeds. One thing that each and every one of us can do is cultivate a better relationship with the piece of planet that we each inhabit. If we can each commit to leaving our little bit of the planet in a better shape than we found it, then we can and we will make a difference. Because if I can make a difference, so can every single one of you. Happy growing, everybody.